I know you are, but what am I?
With his red bow tie, childlike excitement,
It's a stingray!
He was the ultimate performance artist.
and a quirky laugh,
It was a little like a twisted Mr. Rogers.
there wasn't a single person who didn't know the iconic character created by Paul Reubens.
Paul Reubens as Pee Wee Herman was about as famous as you can get.
I'm a loner, Daddy. A rebel.
But then his personal life overshadowed his art.
Paul gets arrested for indecent exposure on a sting operation.
It just looked like the classic guy gone to hell. And he's got all this pornography.
And his own attorney says that when word of the arrest gets out, Reubens' career will be over.
Skewered by the media
Pee Wee Herman was a punchline. He was a joke.
and canceled,
He was kicked when he was down.
He was supposedly a hero to the children.
but he never turned his back on Pee Wee Herman. And through it all, Paul Reubens will be forever remembered as a rebel genius.
He was calculating, and he knew what he was doing.
Hi, everybody. My name's Pee Wee. What's yours?
Pee Wee Herman is like a little boy that never grew up, still having his innocence about him and having fun with it. My name is Debbie Dahl, and I'm a set decorator, and I worked on Pee Wee's Playhouse with Paul Reubens from 1988 to 1991.
Get the car away! It's me!
Pee Wee Herman is the comic brainchild of Paul Reubens, and Pee Wee's Playhouse is Paul's laboratory.
Pee Wee's Playhouse was a very unique show in the history of television because it was an art project done by artists and cartoonists and painters and sculptors.
It used color. It used comedy. It was a little like a twisted Mr. Rogers. You know?
I'm in your living room!
The show had dynamics. It was characters, Phil Hartman, Lawrence Fishburne.
Howdy, Pee Wee! Howdy, Cowboy Curtis! Oh!
Cowboy Curtis would say, like, you know what they say, Pee Wee? Big boots, big feet. Wink, wink.
Missy Vaughn.
I better get my hair done. Aloha.
And we had all the ingredients of a hit.
We all love you, Pee Wee.
You do? Yeah, of course.
A cheeky character in a confident suit, Pee Wee is Paul's rocket to success.
Paul Reubens as Pee Wee Herman was about as famous as you can get.
Peel out!
David Letterman and lots of late night stuff.
Mr. Pee Wee Herman.
He said, Mr. Pee Wee Herman.
And in 1986, there was nobody more famous than Pee Wee Herman.
Before he was Pee Wee Herman, Paul Reubens grew up in Sarasota, Florida, in the first golden age of television.
Paul was born in 52, so things from that era were of his childhood and his surroundings.
I know he always liked soupy sales.
On with the funny stuff!
Paul Reubens watched as a child children's television shows going back to your Howdy Doodies and whatnot.
He fed his appetite for fantasy by hanging out at the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey's Circus, whose winter headquarters were in Sarasota.
And without a question, that's what Pee Wee's Playhouse did. It took everything in Paul Reubens' upbringing and put it up on screen in day-glow color.
Paul always wanted to be an artist and a performer, and in the 70s heads to California to pursue his dreams, becoming a regular with the legendary improv troupe.
Paul Reubens developed the character of Pee Wee Herman when he was working with the Groundlings. Reubens found ways to work the character into different formats, including an appearance as Pee Wee Herman on The Dating Game in 1979.
Number 2, what's the first thought that comes to your mind when you hear the word go?
When I hear the word go, I think about when I was taking traffic school lessons and when I was driving in my car and going real fast in my little Volkswagen bus and speeding down the street real fast and trying to get over to your house.
But Paul has bigger TV goals than game shows.
Paul Reubens really wanted to get onto Saturday Night Live. At the time, it was the apex of television. He goes out to New York, he auditions for SNL, and it's either him or Gilbert Gottfried, and Gilbert Gottfried gets it. My name is Cassine Gaines, and I'm the author of Inside Pee-wee's Playhouse, which is the only book about Pee Wee Herman. He starts thinking, I need to do something to break out as an actor, as a performer, and he had so many characters that he did the Groundlings, but the one that always got the best response was Pee Wee Herman.
Paul Reubens was just getting ready for the world to be ready for Pee Wee Herman.
Pee Wee would become Paul's signature character and his camouflage.
The Groundlings featured fledgling young acts.
Let's have a contest and see who can go the longest without eating this pizza.
And that's where I first met Paul, Pee Wee. My name is Marty Callner. I was the director who first brought Pee Wee to television. Paul and I had the same agent. He told me, he said, listen, I've got this young act. Would you mind going to see him? So I went with Michael Fuchs, who was the head of HBO programming.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's pretty bad to be here.
When we walked out, he goes, okay, what did you think? I said, I think we should do it. It's really different, really unique. And this guy's really an artist. And he said, okay. And that's how it got sold. And the rest is history.
Well, good morning.
The HBO special, I loved it. I knew it was going to be a hit.
Captain Carl, did you remember to wash your hands?
No! I didn't realize it was going to become a cult.
The HBO special leads to an incredible break. His own feature film, directed by none other than Tim Burton.
When I first read the script, I got that it was very childlike, but I really didn't have a concept until I stepped on the set.
My bag! Pee-wee!
Daddy!
My name's E.G. Daly, and I met Paul Reubens, Pee Wee Herman, filming Pee-wee's Big Adventure as the character Dottie.
Wait, I want to talk to you first.
You are talking to me.
No, I want your undivided attention.
And Dottie is like Pee-wee's girlfriend, even though he doesn't really want to admit it.
Look, Daddy, I like you.
I like you.
That's the thing, I like you too.
Daddy!
Where I actually fix his bike up, which is Pee-wee's favorite thing. So Dottie's this like kind of quirky, tomboy, sweet character who just loves Pee-wee.
Pee-wee bursts onto the big screen. He's an immature prankster and an ambivalent leading man.
So long, Dad.
There is something very specific and both childish and childlike to Pee Wee Herman, but it's also entirely unregulated by maturity.
Paul Reubens got noticed, and there were other creative people who saw what I saw. He had kept flourishing and flourishing, and it spawned the CBS series.
Paul spins the HBO special and film into a weekly CBS show, Pee-wee's Playhouse. The first season goes into production in New York and then moves to LA.
The production designer and I were going to meet Paul Reubens and the production company about starting the show here in California. And I was so excited to meet Paul Reubens. I couldn't wait.
Chocolatey!
And I remember sitting in the office, we start talking about the show, and I'm thinking, well, should we be talking about the show without Paul Reubens here? And little did I know, he was there the whole time. He had grown his hair out really long, he had a beard, and I had no idea it was him. He did not like to be recognizable when he was not Pee Wee Herman. When he was in costume, he would never be Paul Reubens. It was Pee Wee Herman. And pretty much the same when he was not in costume. and he was dressed as a civilian, he was Paul Reubens. Never the two shall cross.
Paul tries to make the distinction between performer and creator.
It really was like there were two people. It wasn't like an actor playing this character, it was a whole being. And that to me was fascinating, that he was just like, you could kind of just fall into this thing with him because he was so connected and committed to this character.
Pee-wee was just funny, loud, obnoxious, and Paul was very quiet, timid, and shy.
Paul's now a certified star.
We thought we would talk a little bit to Paul Reubens, who is Pee Wee Herman, or is Pee Wee Herman Paul Reubens?
I'm having trouble figuring that out myself lately.
But separating art and life doesn't come easy for him.
Paul was a very reserved guy, and he didn't really become close with so many people to show himself. Pee-wee was a character that took on many dimensions, from adult humor to straight children's humor.
I mean, when you really think about it, nobody acts like Pee Wee Herman. It's a very stylized, heightened clown persona, stylized to the point of absurdity. This absurd man-child.
What's missing from this picture? It's just me, without my bike!
There was a lot of Pee-wee in Paul, even though it wasn't on the surface. He was like a big kid that wanted to make his own playhouse.
He was very much in control of the character, and he was very protective of the character. Paul was a different guy than Pee-wee, and he was calculating, and he knew what he was doing.
And there's no question that Paul is comfortable pulling the strings behind Pee Wee Herman.
Pee Wee Herman doesn't play by the rules that grown-ups have to play by. He was a character who could do anything, and people would always relate to Pee Wee Herman because that child is inside all of us.
Get up!
Sexually ambiguous and oddly ageless, by the mid-'80s, Pee Wee Herman catapults into unlikely rock star status.
Gotta have the feeling?
The character Pee Wee Herman just got bigger and bigger and bigger.
While Paul starts retreating inward.
Until he had a big adventure, as it were. At an adult movie theater in Sarasota, Florida. And that presented a lot of challenges.
Paul Reubens, to me, was the ultimate performance artist. What Paul did with Pee Wee Herman was break new ground. He was able to take this performance art and do multimedia. He was able to use comedy and not only make it visual for TV, but film and also Broadway. Hi, I'm Cyndi Lauper, musician, activist, singer, songwriter, actress, basically Renaissance woman. I met Paul Reubens backstage at the MTV New Year's Eve ball in 1983, about to be 84. We just started talking and clicked. I didn't think about who was Paul, who was Pee-wee. That never occurred to me because Pee-wee was a performance art piece. And Paul was a visual artist. He was a performance artist.
Pee-wee's Playhouse was really Paul Reubens' vision. And I used to think of it as like his childhood and kind of in the 50s and the 60s. We were trying to exude fun and whimsy and a bit of retro. Every little corner of that set had so much personality and a purpose. Everything had his stamp on it. There would be the furniture that would talk to you, or the clock on the wall would give you the time, but also talk to you.
Hey, Pee-wee!
The flowers in the flower beds by the window would sing and dance. Living in a fantasy land. That's what the character Pee Wee Herman was about.
Paul had created a character for kids that grown-ups love.
Pee-wee, you're at the Pee Wee Herman convention.
All right, man.
Don't get the cameraman. No, I poked you. I didn't think that. We like Pee-wee.
I was very intimidated to meet Paul or even work with him because he was so famous. My name is Wayne White, and I worked with Paul Rubens on Pee-wee's Playhouse as a set designer, puppet designer, and puppeteer from 1986 to 1990. But I soon found out that he was a lot like me and a lot like all the other artists. In fact, he was just another artist who was there to make cool things.
He was a perfectionist. If something wasn't right, we kept doing it over and over and over again until he felt that it represented Pee-wee the best.
And Pee Wee Herman is at his best, disarming audiences with twisted behavior, then going in strong with adult innuendo.
Hey, Miss Yvonne, come stand over me.
Every time there was an adult joke, we always kind of wondered, like, well, isn't the network getting this?
I better go put this fruitcake in the refrigerator before it gets any harder.
There were winks and nudges, both that there was an older audience, parents watching, but also that there was an audience of, say, college students who might have been on different substances, either waking up or, say, going to bed still on a Saturday morning, who could also find entertainment in a program like that as an antidote to the Reagan-Bush 80s that says grown-ups are conservative, grown-ups are mature. Pee Wee Herman is not conservative. Pee Wee Herman is not mature.
The Reagan 80s are a time of social and cultural upheaval.
So much has happened over these last years. So much to shake the foundations of all that we know and all that we believe in. And when it comes to drugs and alcohol, just say no.
Family values, reaction to AIDS, sexual identity politics. And Pee Wee Herman, in 50s drag, flies under the radar.
Why didn't you take a picture? It'll last longer.
And it all works until Paul's private life collides head-on with his Pee Wee persona.
Friday night, Rubens went to a XXX theater in Sarasota and watched Nancy Nurse. Undercover agents say he exposed himself twice, and they grabbed him.
Paul Rubens gets arrested for indecent exposure in a Sarasota adult film house on a sting operation.
Friday night, undercover Sarasota sheriff's deputies arrested Rubens at this XXX theater on very adult charges.
The fact that he had a kids show, of course, fueled the national outrage, but as big a shock was to see Pee Wee Herman, who are used to, this very comically clean-cut character, with long hair, glowering out of a mugshot, basic disappear into the woodwork kind of sedate appearance.
It's the mugshot flashed in news media around the world. Paul Rubens is exposed, which means so is Pee Wee.
It just looked like the classic guy gone to hell.
And every TV, radio show, and newspaper were covering that story 24/7.
Children's television host accused of publicly exposing himself.
I think if you try and explain the 1991 arrest to anyone who wasn't alive during that time, they don't quite understand what a big deal it was.
He exposed himself at an X-rated movie in his hometown.
I mean, it was a sex scandal without the sex. It was a victimless crime, if it even happened.
Porn theaters were a place where single men would go and furtively abuse themselves. Sometimes men went there to meet other people, but generally, this was what they had. He was in a straight movie theater, and yes, he was masturbating, as were other people in the theater.
Paul isn't the only person in the theater that night, but his is the only mugshot to make headlines.
That mugshot, once you saw that image, you couldn't unsee it. My name is Ryan McCormick of Goldman McCormick Public Relations, based in New York City, and we specialize in crisis communications. And I have been discussing Paul Reubens in the media for years, following his career, following his scandal. It was catastrophic for his image. It was like a comet hitting the earth. That was one of the few times where you saw a person who presented themselves in public act completely different in private. And it wasn't so much what he did, it's the fact that it was such a stark contrast for the image he was portraying.
It's been over a week since Pee-wee Gate, the scandal that occurred in Sarasota, Florida.
A celebrity that was entertaining children, millions of children across the U.S., that's what made it so salacious.
He was supposedly a hero to the children. I mean, this is what we want to hold up to the children?
My feeling is when Paul was arrested, that he did a really dumb thing, but he's a human being. He was not a pervert by any stretch of the imagination. It hurt Paul. It hurt his psyche.
He had a very sensitive side like that, and I knew that sensitive side was going to get a big kicking.
And his own attorney says that when word of the arrest gets out, Reubens' career will be over.
But it seemed like this 1991 arrest just put a permanent asterisk on Paul Reubens' career for the rest of his life. There was something to the fact that no one really knew who Paul Reubens was. So when people got this glimpse of the mugshot, I think there was a healthy portion of the population that sort of felt like, who really is Pee Wee Herman?
Pee Wee Herman, once a persona Paul could hide behind, is at the center of a growing scandal, and Paul is forced into the spotlight.
I think that Pee Wee was how he would like to be, where nothing bothered him. Paul was a lot more sensitive than that. And in reality, yes, things got to him and hurt him, and the man at this time was really in bad shape.
Publicly humiliated at the height of his fame, Paul's night at the movies comes crashing down on Pee Wee.
Paul Reubens might have aged, but it was important always that Pee Wee Herman not mature, not grow up, Pee Wee Herman not go through puberty, all of the things that happen to ordinary little boys as they grow up.
Not only could Pee Wee Herman not grow up, the character's integrity is called into question right along with Paul's.
You had like parents groups that were going out and complaining about children's television and rap lyrics and Tipper Gore.
Mrs. Gore has joined forces with state and national PTA members to combat what she considers sexually explicit and violent lyrics.
Our songs about glorifying incest, they're songs about rape.
And so part of this scandal was a response to just the culture at the time.
The public reaction is swift. Pee Wee Herman merchandise is removed from shelves. CBS pulls Pee Wee's Playhouse reruns. But Paul's celebrity friends come to his defense.
He hasn't even got his day in court yet. And it's a shame that the way that the media and then the rest of the people have crucified him before he's even had a day in court. And even if he is, so what?
He was kicked when he was down. And Pee Wee Herman fans didn't stand for it. There were free Pee Wee rallies all across the United States.
He's clearly a comic genius, and he's being railroaded.
Pee Wee fans take to the streets, demanding the return of Pee Wee's Playhouse and to bring Pee Wee out of exile.
It wasn't until Paul Reubens returned as Pee Wee Herman at the MTV Video Music Awards that the pressure was let out of the room a little bit.
I was at the MTV Awards when Paul came out as Pee Wee and did that very famous line.
Heard any good jokes lately?
It was funny, and funny is funny.
Thank you very much. That really means a lot to me. Thank you.
Facing the character assassination head-on, Paul's return to TV as Pee Wee Herman is a turning point in his career and his life.
I admire the courage that he had. And he took a chance, and the chance paid off.
Welcome to the 1991 MTV Video Music Awards!
It was kind of cool to be a Pee Wee Herman fan again.
But far from MTV, on Saturday morning television, it's still a steep climb back.
So funny, I forgot to laugh!
Because he had a children's television show, he was really put on the spot.
Thank you very much.
The MTV appearance was interesting because it showed the two audiences that Pee Wee Herman and Paul Reubens had and how difficult it was going to be to reconcile them. I'm Dan Feinberg, Chief Television Critic with The Hollywood Reporter. When Paul Reubens died in 2023, I wrote a tribute to Reubens and to Pee Wee Herman.
Paul's comeback as Pee Wee Herman is a triumph with his Gen X fans.
And for that audience, he'd done nothing wrong. He was being persecuted for heaven knows what, and they still loved him.
But for those who saw Paul mostly as a children's entertainer, it was as if Pee Wee, in his undersized suit, was in the movie theater that night.
Pee Wee's Playhouse, that was a show that was marketed for children. It put him in a strange place, and that was a problem that would persist for the rest of his career.
Damaging the trust of a good chunk of his audience, the scandal makes Pee Wee too hot to handle.
CBS pulled the show, but I guess I understood the pressure because he was a person that had a children's show. But it was kind of sad. All our work was kind of pulled and tarnished.
CBS and Paul part ways, and the reruns stay locked in the CBS vault.
When Paul's trouble happened, he already knew we weren't going to do a fifth season. Paul did not want to be forever the Pee Wee's Playhouse guy myself, but I certainly didn't want it to end that way. I didn't like that at all. But what are you going to do? It was network television. I thought that was pretty chicken shit.
This ended up having to be punishment for both Paul Reubens and Pee Wee Herman because of the union of character and performer. Because he wasn't really a good talk show guest as himself.
Stand up straight, Paul. I'm sure your mother has told you that many times.
I have to say hello to my mother and my father.
He couldn't do something like what Hugh Grant did after the Divine Brown incident.
What the hell were you thinking?
He couldn't go on a talk show, take his lumps as Paul Reubens, and be kind of forgiven in that way.
He was very private. So, you gotta respect that.
In the end, Paul agrees to a small fine and, as part of his community service, agrees to do a Just Say No Drugs PSA.
This is crack. Rock cocaine. It isn't glamorous or cool or kid stuff. It's the most addictive kind of cocaine, and it can kill you. What's really bad is nobody knows how much it takes.
The PSA becomes a classic piece of subversive 80s humor, but speculation about his and Pee Wee's identity is no joke.
People just couldn't deal with him as a real man, as a real sexual being. And I think for Paul, it was the wound that never healed. He never really got over it. It made him sort of a recluse.
Paul walks away from Pee Wee and shies away from attention. But he never stops working, showing that his comedic chops are not reserved to an oversized boy in an undersized suit. He's cast in Batman Returns and the Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie.
For him. We're immortal, Buffy.
He's an unforgettable vampire and a superhero with an odd superpower in Mystery Men.
A character called the Spleen.
The Spleen!
The Spleen. My superpower is flatulence.
Still in the picture, Paul caps off a decade-long comeback in the coke smuggling saga Blow.
Kirby, he is yummy.
Stealing scenes from star Johnny Depp. Audiences are getting to know Paul Reubens beyond being a children's entertainer, but he has no idea that his problems with the law are not over, not by a long shot.
While Paul was down in Florida taking care of his father, the LA police came and raided his home. He was a collector of vintage physique photography. They would be in heroic poses, often bodybuilding poses. It was kitschy and comical. My name is Diane Hansen. I am the sexy book editor for Taschen Publishing. I met Paul Reubens when we discussed doing a book of his physique photography and antique pinup collection.
LA police raid Paul's home on the basis of an unusual tip about his photography collection.
His friend had been photographing his gardener in this way. The gardener had told him that he was of legal age. Then he brought him over to Paul's house. The gardener went to the police and claimed to be 14. And then he said, oh, and also, I've been to Paul Reubens' house, and he's got all this pornography. It was all over the papers that he was being charged with child pornography.
Ladies and gentlemen, the happiest boy in the world, Pee-wee Herman!
Once heralded as the genius behind Pee-wee Herman and one of the biggest names in show business, Paul Reubens enters the new millennium in the crosshairs of the law.
I think that the police had something salacious on a Hollywood star and that he had been picked up 10 years before because of the 1991 episode. And so, you know, they'd look back on that, yeah, now we got him again.
Paul's house is raided, but his alleged porn collection is not what the police think it is.
Well, the only thing they found was a photograph of him as a baby lying naked on a rug.
Of course, Paul is never charged with possession of child pornography, but the damage is done.
He was very frustrated and concerned with clearing up his reputation and clearing up the lies of this situation.
Even when there was clarification, it was hard again to get the linkages out of people's heads.
Demoralized and once again humiliated, Paul tries to put his personal battle aside and go back to what he loves most. He lands a memorable sitcom role as a bizarro prince.
Thank you. Thank you all, dear friends.
It's a kind of weird not seen since his Pee-wee days. And it spurs Paul to revive an act with an old friend.
There was a woman at HBO, her name was Nancy Geller, and she said to me, you know, your friend Paul is doing a Broadway show as Pee-wee. Do you want to direct it and bring it to life? I said, I would be thrilled.
Paul's biggest concern was fitting into the suit.
This is the real Pee-wee Herman outfit we have right here, and we were curious if he would fit into it. Do you think he could fit into it?
Pee-wee Herman was a part of him. Pee-wee Herman could just be pulled up at any moment. Could the outside match that?
Do you feel yourself becoming Pee-wee as you put it on?
You know, it's not about the pants. Pee-wee is really in me.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
Little stage music here, please.
The fact that we were in New York and we were on Broadway gave it a different energy on its own. He was older. He was really sure of himself, and he was comfortable, and so was I.
In 2010, Paul returns to the stage and HBO in The Pee-wee Herman Show on Broadway.
incredible. Hello back there.
It's snack time! Since I puked, I'm already hungry!
His first time in public as Pee-wee since 1991.
People were eager to see that character back, and people were eager to welcome Paul Reubens back. For people who grew up with the character, it was important, and for him it was important.
For Paul, it's more than a one-off performance. It's a ticket to take Pee-wee further.
Wow, you sure got a big hose.
You haven't seen the whole thing.
I think the Broadway special introduced him to buyers at the streamers and the networks who really didn't know who he was.
I wonder if the rings are cooked yet.
Once they saw, oh my God, look how talented this guy is. So I do think it helped him do bigger things there.
It wasn't until Pee Wee Herman returned for his stage show that Paul felt comfortable enough, maybe confident enough, to do a third feature film as Pee Wee Herman, and that was Pee-wee's Big Holiday.
Joe Manganiello co-stars in the film as himself.
Wow.
Thanks. Appreciate that.
Well, how did that come about?
We both wound up at an Emmy party together. Someone pointed him out and said, "Hey, it's Pee Wee Herman." I went, "Oh my God." Ran over to him, told him I was the biggest fan in the world. And then I asked him to go see Tim Burton had this art exhibit. I said, "Bill, do you want to go with me?" And then afterwards he turns to me and says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Nothing. I don't know. I was going to get something to eat." He's like, "Do you want to come over to my house?" It's like Pee-wee's Playhouse?
Yeah! I had no idea what to expect from another Pee Wee Herman film, especially after such a long period of time of no Pee Wee Herman on the big screen.
Paul reimagines Pee-wee as a character trapped in a small world of his own making.
Your miniature world is awesome. Hey, what's on the other side of those railroad tracks? Beyond Fairville.
I don't know. I've never been there.
Never?
But he's swept off his feet by a hunky stranger who dares him to break free.
And you're going to take a holiday. I got your reason right here.
What is it? What?
I want you to be at my birthday party.
He was such a performance artist. He had comedy, he did visual thing. He was so funny, but he was also so visual, so clever.
What should I do? I wish I had some kind of sign. Whoa, that's a big apple. Big apple. That's it. Bingo! Come on, little Connie. We're going to New York City.
Die-hard Pee Wee Herman fans are pumped. Paul Reubens has brought back their beloved prankster with legendary producer-director Judd Apatow.
And I think Judd Apatow, being someone who kind of grew up on Pee Wee Herman himself, there was a comfort there where Paul felt safe working with him on Pee Wee's Big Holiday. So it might just be a case where it never really felt right until that time.
Fans can't help but notice a change. From Pee-wee's big screen debut as a sexually ambiguous leading man-child...
Pee-wee, listen. If you want my...
I don't want your help. I don't need the police, and I don't need you.
...to the 2016 Netflix movie, where the plot suggests a very different kind of adventure. To many, Paul's finally expressing his true self to the world. Paul Reubens survived public humiliation and a private struggle with his identity. But he's got one more fight on his hands.
I was involved with him most of his career, including his last special from Broadway, and I never knew he was sick. Never. And he didn't act sick. Matter of fact, from what I hear from friends of mine, I don't know how many people he actually even shared it with.
He was really a private guy. And even though I knew him for years and years and years, he just didn't want to share that.
Not long after Pee-wee's big holiday streams on Netflix, Paul is diagnosed with cancer, but chooses to keep it quiet.
I got this idea to do a podcast, and I wanted to do it with him, but then everything just... He got sicker. I didn't know he was sick at the time. And again, I guess I thought I knew him and what was going on with his personal life, but, you know, there are people that want the dignity of suffering on their own.
He was suffering for at least 3 years. I think he was pretty much of a recluse, especially a public figure like Paul. You don't want people to see you in that condition. I know that sounds brutal, but he just did not want people to remember him in that state.
Paul Reubens dies in July 2023. He was 70.
I think that's what hit us the hardest, when you didn't even know that he was ill and he passed away. But I look back at that and I think, well, he did it in Paul Reubens style by keeping it out of the public and hiding it and thinking more of others before himself.
Paul Reubens, he would stand by you, he would follow up with you on your birthday, and really was, by all accounts, the best friend someone could have.
It shows the character, the type of person he was. He was very quiet and shy and reserved and private, and he was really a good person and a very kind, loving human being, and insanely talented and creative.
Paul was strong and stubborn, okay? And he didn't suffer fools gladly, but he was a loving, friendly, supportive friend. And not just to me, but to everybody who was fortunate enough to call him a friend.
As Pee-wee Herman, Paul never fell out of character, but there was one moment when he did, and his friends say it was classic Paul.
Thank you so much. I really, really do. This is really not an act. This is really me just trying to thank you and tell you that this really, really warms my heart and means something real to me. Thank you so much. Thank you.
He was the